Good evening, my friends. The kettle's whispering softly tonight, rain tracing lines down the window. Where are you listening from? I wonder, the city, the coast, or somewhere quiet like St. Mary Mead. Settle in close. Tonight's tale begins with a letter written in green ink, sealed but never sent. By sunrise its writer would be gone, and the village would never sleep quite the same again. Autumn had settled softly over St. Mary Mead. The air smelled of damp leaves and faint wood smoke. Shops closed earlier now, lanterns flickered behind lace curtains, and by the post office, gossip moved faster than the wind. Mrs. Dorothea Blythe had arrived only 3 weeks before, a widow, quiet, pale as chalk. She rented the small ivy-covered cottage at the end of Mill Lane, the one everyone called Ivy Hollow. She spoke politely, smiled rarely, and kept to herself. Every dawn, the postman saw her standing by her window. She wrote with a heavy hand using green ink, always the same stationery cream paper, pressed with a faint violet scent. And every afternoon, she sealed a letter with wax, green wax, thick and neat. Then she placed it in her letterbox, but no postman ever collected it. By the second week, the village had begun to whisper. Lady Bantry told Miss Marple about it over tea. "Every day, Jane," she said, stirring her cup slowly. "A letter appears, but Evans swears he's never been asked to fetch it. Odd, isn't it?" Miss Marple looked thoughtful. "Perhaps she posts it herself." Lady Bantry leaned closer. "Evans says she never leaves the cottage." Across the lane, the baker's wife had her own story. She claimed the widow sometimes talked to herself at twilight. Said she'd heard voices through the open kitchen window, 2, maybe 3. No one believed her, of course. The baker's wife often imagined things. Miss Marple, however, made a small note in her mind, a habit of hers to remember what others forgot. The following week, the maid at Ivy Hollow came to the grocer's. She spoke in a whisper. "Mrs. Blythe spends hours at her desk, ma'am. She don't eat, don't sleep much either. Writes those letters like she's afraid to stop." No one laughed. The tone was too serious for that. Rain came that evening, soft and thin. From the tea-shop window, Miss Marple and Lady Bantry watched the widow walk past, carrying her umbrella and a folded envelope. "She's at it again," Lady Bantry murmured. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles. "Green ink," she said quietly. "People rarely choose such a color unless they wish to be remembered." The church bell struck 7. Shutters closed. The village grew still. Only the sound of rain and the faint scratching of a pen remained. And then, one grey morning, the letterbox stood empty. No paper, no wax, no trace of the widow's neat green writing. The postman frowned. "First time in weeks," he said, shaking his head. Miss Marple looked toward Ivy Hollow Cottage. The curtains were drawn, no smoke from the chimney, no sound at all, and Dorothea Blythe was missing. The maid arrived just after 7. Fog hung low over the lane, soft and grey. She pushed the gate open, calling gently, "Mrs. Blythe?" No answer. The door to Ivy Hollow stood half open. Inside, the air felt wrong, too still. The kettle on the stove was warm, humming faintly. Steam had dried on the spout, leaving a chalky ring. On the table papers, dozens of them. Pages half-written, one torn clean across the middle. Ink stains on the cloth. The maid froze. Mrs. Blythe never left a mess. She hurried out to the road and fetched Mr. Evans, the postman, who happened to pass by. He stepped inside, looked once, and shook his head. "She's wandered off," he muttered. "Poor soul's not been right since her husband died." By noon, the constable had come. He looked around, scratched his chin, and wrote a few notes. No struggle, no theft, door unlocked. Must have gone for a walk. And with that, he left. Word reached Miss Marple by tea-time. Lady Bantry came breathless to her gate. "Jane, it's that widow. Gone. House open, kettle on." Miss Marple took her shawl at once. "I think I'll just step down and look." At Ivy Hollow, the yard was damp but clean. No prints on the path. No footprints in the soil. Not even a stray mark near the hedge. Inside, Miss Marple moved softly, her eyes taking in what others missed. She touched the table edge. Dry. the cup beside the kettle half full, untouched. She leaned closer to the papers. A sentence, unfinished. "Forgive me, but the truth can no longer." And then the tear. On the floor lay the fountain pen. She picked it up carefully. The nib was cracked, bent slightly, as if pressed too hard. She turned it in the light. The smell of ink rose faintly sharp, metallic, with a hint of lavender. A woman's scent mixed with something else, something bitter. Miss Marple set the pen down on a clean page. Her eyes narrowed. The constable had said there were no clues, but clues rarely announce themselves. They wait, quietly. She drew her gloves tighter. The room was tidy, yet it felt emptied too quickly, like someone had gathered what mattered and gone in silence, or someone had taken her. As she moved toward the door, something caught the afternoon light. On the corner of the table, faint but clear, a smudge. Small, curved, not dust, not ink spilled. It was a single fingerprint, and it shone dark green. They found her the next morning. Face turned toward the reeds, shoes soaked, hands folded neatly across her coat. No struggle, no sign of violence, just stillness. The river path curved behind the cottage, a quiet place where villagers sometimes walked their dogs. It was there the gardener's boy spotted her hat floating by the bank. He called out. 2 men came running from the mill. Within minutes the constable arrived. Inspector Slack followed soon after, coat collar up, voice brisk as always. He glanced once at the body and sighed. "Heart failure," he said. "Old shock, perhaps. Widow's nerves." He looked at the mud. "See? No footprints but her own. Case closed." And with that, he turned away. Miss Marple stood beside him, hands folded in her gloves. Her eyes, however, did not move away so quickly. They traced the shape of the ground, the edge of the path, the faint drag of her skirt hem through the grass. Then nothing. No sign she had fallen, more as if she had been placed there. The letter fragments had been found in her coat pocket, soggy but legible enough. Miss Marple spread them gently on a clean handkerchief. The words bled faintly into the fabric. "My sister, my debt. Forgive what I could not repay." Her lips pressed thin. A sister. No one in the village had mentioned a sister. Doctor. Haydock arrived shortly after, medical bag in hand, his manner kind but practical. He examined the body quickly, checked her pulse, then looked up. "No marks, no bruising, no sign of poison or trauma," he said. "Heart failure fits." He began to pack away his stethoscope. Miss Marple asked softly, "And her hands?" He paused. Clean, fingertips slightly stained, though ink, perhaps. He frowned, thoughtful. Strange color, too. Green, not black. She nodded slowly. "Green ink. She used it for her letters." The inspector raised an eyebrow. "You think the ink killed her, Miss Marple?" A hint of amusement. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked again at the fragments. The ink had smeared in several places, as if touched while still wet. Yet there was no pen nearby, and no letter completed. "Heart failure rarely smudges ink," she murmured. Dr. Haydock looked up. "Pardon?" "Nothing," she said softly, just thinking, aloud. The constable folded his notebook. Slack turned to leave. Funeral arrangements will be handled by the parish. Simple matter, really. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the river. The reflection trembled with the current. It looked peaceful, but peace was often deceptive. She turned back toward the cottage, the thought following her like a shadow. Dorothea Blythe had been writing when death came. The sentence unfinished, the ink still damp, but the pen had never touched the page. The funeral was small, grey morning light, thin mist drifting across the churchyard. Only a few villagers came, mostly women with gloved hands and quiet eyes. The bell tolled once, then fell silent. Miss Marple stood beside Lady Bantry near the back row. Neither spoke for a while. The vicar read gently, his voice carrying through the still air. Dorothea's coffin rested beneath the old yew tree, polished but plain. No flowers except a single white rose from the parish garden. When the service ended, the murmur began that soft, inevitable hum of village talk. People who never spoke of one another suddenly had plenty to say. Mrs. Harper whispered first. She never looked well, poor dear. I always said that cottage was too lonely. Then the baker's wife. Lonely, maybe, but she wasn't short of money. Her husband left her quite comfortable, so I heard. Lady Bantry sighed. Comfortable indeed. But some deaths come too conveniently, Jane. Her husband's heart failed just a year ago, same time, same doctor, same diagnosis. Now hers too. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. That would be quite the coincidence, wouldn't it? The gravedigger lowered the coffin carefully. The sound of earth falling on the wood echoed faintly. One by one, the villagers drifted away. Only Miss Marple and Lady Bantry remained by the gate. The mist thickened, curling around the gravestones. That's when they saw him. A man, standing near the hedge, coat dark, collar high, tall, still, almost motionless, his face half hidden beneath his hat. He waited until the last villager had gone. Then he stepped forward. He carried a single envelope cream paper, sealed with green wax. He placed it gently on the grave. No flowers, no note, just that one envelope. And then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the lane. Lady Bantry whispered, "Do you know him?" Miss Marple shook her head slowly. "No, but I shall." The two women stood for a moment longer. The breeze moved through the yew branches, scattering a few dry leaves onto the mound. Miss Marple stepped closer to the grave. She looked down at the envelope. The seal gleamed faintly, same shade of green as Dorothea's ink. She hesitated, then lifted it with her gloved hand. It was light, almost empty. Back home that afternoon, she placed the envelope on her writing table. Steam from her tea curled around it. The wax cracked softly as she opened it. No letter, no handwriting, nothing written at all. Only a single violet pressed flat between the folds, fragile, dry, and scentless. She studied it in silence. Lady Bantry's words echoed faintly. "Too conveniently, Jane." Miss Marple set the violet down beside her cup. Its color had faded to grey-green. Its meaning, however, had not. "Inside it," she murmured. No words at all, just a pressed violet. Morning light settled over the Bantry house like a quiet blessing. Thin sun through pale curtains. Silverware gleaming softly on the breakfast table. The smell of toast and tea filled the room. Lady Bantry read the morning paper with little interest. Miss Marple, seated opposite, stirred her tea absently. Her mind wasn't on breakfast. It was still at Ivy Hollow. A maid entered with a tray of letters. None for them, of course, only circulars and the church notice. The maid left quickly. The ticking clock filled the silence. Lady Bantry lowered her paper. "You're thinking of the widow," she said quietly. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I often think of those who leave without finishing what they meant to say." She reached into her handbag and drew out a folded page, one of Dorothea Blythe's fragments. The edges had dried now, faint green lines curling where the ink had bled. Marple read it again. "My sister, my debt." She sighed softly. "There's always a sister in these stories," she murmured. Lady Bantry frowned. "Do you think there truly was one?" Marple didn't answer. Her eyes had gone distant, thoughtful. By mid-morning, she was already on her way back to Ivy Hollow. The constable had sealed the door, but Miss Marple had permission to collect Dorothea's things for the parish. Inside, the cottage smelled of dust and old roses. The air still carried a faint trace of lavender and ink. The writing desk remained as she'd last seen it, tidy, yet unsettled. A candle holder stood near the edge. Miss Marple leaned closer. 2 wax drips had hardened on the surface, one pale ivory, one darker, almost honey-colored. She ran a gloved finger beside them. Different candles, different flames. "Someone visited the night before she died," a voice said behind her. It was the maid, timid, clutching her shawl. "She told me to go early, said she'd be writing late. But when I came next morning, the back gate was unlatched. I think someone came after I'd gone." Miss Marple turned slightly. Did you see anyone that day? No, ma'am. Just a gentleman passing near the post road. Tall, dark coat. Didn't stop. The same description as the stranger at the funeral. Miss Marple looked back at the table. 2 candles, 2 cups, 2 writers perhaps, and only one still alive to tell it. She stood quietly for a moment, eyes on the broken pen left in the drawer. Then she straightened, closing the maid's, trembling hand around a coin. Thank you, my dear. You've helped more than you know. Outside, the wind moved softly through the ivy. The cottage looked peaceful again, but the peace was a lie. Miss Marple looked once toward the river path, then back at the window where the ink stains still shimmered faintly. 2 candles, she whispered. 2 writers, 1 dead. The study smelled of dust and forgotten air. Old curtains drawn halfway, light slanting in narrow bands across the desk. Miss Marple stood at the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. This had been Mr. Blythe's room, once Dorothea's late husband. Everything sat untouched. Papers yellowed. A single glass of dried ink on the table, and a drawer locked. She tried it gently. It refused to move. Locks never stopped her long. From her handbag, she drew a small hairpin and worked the latch until it clicked softly open. Inside, she found neat order. A ledger, first entries in a man's hand, careful and cold. Business dealings, perhaps. Several payments crossed through in green ink. Unusual. Men rarely use such color. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope stamped, Last Will and Testament, unopened. Buck. Unsigned. She turned it once, reading the date barely a week before his death. So recent, so quiet. At the bottom of the drawer, a small photograph waited sepia, fading to brown. A younger man, handsome, confident, in a Paris street cafe. Across the bottom edge, the name was scrawled in sharp black ink. R.H. Paris. Miss Marple looked at it for a long moment, then placed it beside the ledger. A scrap of torn paper fluttered out as she moved the books. The edges burnt slightly, as though someone had tried to destroy it. Only a few words remained. If he returns, burn everything. She stood still. The ticking clock in the hall sounded louder now. Dorothea had known someone might come back. She had prepared or tried to. Miss Marple replaced the pin in her hair and closed the drawer quietly. The smell of candle wax lingered faintly, not from last night's light, but older. Someone had searched this place before. Someone careful enough to leave everything just so. She looked once more at the photograph. A younger man, a stranger to the village, smiling toward the camera with the ease of someone who hides secrets well. The initials echoed in her mind. R.H. The same she had seen penciled faintly at the edge of Dorothea's unfinished page. She slipped the torn note into her pocket, folded the ledger shut, and glanced toward the window. Outside, the trees moved slowly, their shadows bending across the grass. Dorothea's husband had kept records, warnings, names. She had known danger might return, but danger had already been inside her house. Miss Marple whispered softly, "If he returns, burn everything." Her gaze fell again on the drawer, now empty of secrets but not of questions. She turned for the door, voice barely a breath. "But someone didn't burn," she said. "Someone read." The visitor arrived just after noon. The air was still, heavy with the scent of last night's rain. A knock at the Bantry house door, polite, deliberate, steady. Miss Marple looked up from her sewing as Lady Bantry called for the maid. "Mr. Richard Hale," the maid announced. A tall man stepped into the room, removing his hat. Dark coat, silver cufflinks, shoes too polished for a country road. His smile was practiced kind, but measured. He bowed slightly. "Forgive the intrusion, ladies. I came on behalf of the late Mr. Blythe. We were business partners, years ago. I only learned of Mrs. Blythe's passing this morning." Lady Bantry gestured toward a chair. "How considerate of you to come all this way." He sat, posture perfect, hat balanced on one knee. Miss Marple watched quietly. Men who rehearsed their words usually rehearsed their truths as well. Hale continued, smoothly. Her husband and I dealt in small investments, imports mainly. Paris, sometimes. A fine gentleman, though. Impulsive. I was fond of both him and dear Mrs. Blythe. Fond? Lady Bantry repeated softly. Hale's smile did not waver. Yes, I had the privilege of visiting Ivy Hollow several times. She kept a lovely garden. White violets, I recall. Miss Marple's eyes lifted. The pressed violet from the grave came instantly to mind. He spoke the detail as if recalling a photograph, not a memory. Too smooth, too exact. "And what brings you now, Mr. Hale?" she asked. "Condolence," he replied simply. Then, after a pause, "And perhaps a few papers Mr. Blythe left in his study. Old contracts. Trivial things, really." He smiled again, but his eyes flickered briefly, not grief, not nostalgia. Calculation, the kind that weighs opportunity. Miss Marple tilted her head. "The study has been closed since Mrs. Blythe's death. Would you know where he kept those papers?" He answered without hesitation. "Top drawer, right side." Lady Bantry frowned. "That's very precise for something trivial." Hale's expression softened. "Habit, Lady Bantry. Some details stay with one, especially when a good man dies too soon." He rose politely. "I shan't trouble you further. I only wish to pay my respects." Miss Marple stood as well, her face unreadable. "Of course, the dead deserve their due." He bowed once more, collected his hat, and left. The door shut quietly behind him. For a long moment, only the sound of the mantel clock filled the room. Lady Bantry spoke first. "Well, Jane, what do you think of him?" Miss Marple's gaze drifted toward the window. "Too polished," she said softly. "Too prepared." Then she looked down at the writing desk. The ink bottle always there beside her notebook was gone. She drew a slow breath. "And when he left," she murmured, "the ink bottle was gone." The post office in St. Mary Mead was quiet that morning. Dusty light through the front window, scent of paper and twine. Behind the counter stood old Mr. Evans, polishing his spectacles. He smiled when Miss Marple entered, as he always did. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said. "Come to send or to see?" She smiled gently. "To see, I think." "I wondered, Mr. Evans, have you had any letters lately? Written in green ink?" He paused, frowning. "Green, you say? Well, now, that's not common." He opened the drawer beneath the scales and pulled out a bundle of envelopes tied with thin string. "These came in last month. Never posted out, though. No stamps. We were to hold them for collection, all from Ivy Hollow, same handwriting." She untied the bundle slowly. 3 envelopes, each sealed neatly, each addressed in fine, slanted script. "The Willington Trust, London." She examined the ink. Dark emerald, pressed deep into the paper as though the writer's hand trembled slightly. She held one close to the light. The scent was unmistakable lavender and metal. Dorothea Blythe's hand. "Mind if I take a quick look inside, Mr. Evans?" "Strictly for the vicar's inventory, of course." He nodded. "With you, Miss Marple, I expect nothing less than good sense." At a small table near the door, she opened the first envelope carefully. No greeting, no signature. Only one line written across the page. "Forgive the debt. It was never mine to keep." She opened the second. Same words again, but the pen had pressed harder, darker. Ink pooled slightly at the edge of each stroke. The third letter was different. The handwriting began the same slant, same curl of the G. But halfway down, the letters grew tighter, sharper, different rhythm, the kind of change that happens when a hand no longer belongs to the same mind. She traced the line with her finger. The final sentence read, "All shall be," returned, "even the price of silence." Mr. Evans cleared his throat gently. Strange thing, those letters. She brought them in herself, said someone would come fetch them. No one ever did. When was that? Night before she died. Miss Marple folded the papers carefully. The phrase echoed in her mind. Forgive the debt. It was never mine to keep, not a widow's guilt. A confession, or perhaps a warning. She placed the letters back in their envelopes and tied the bundle once more. Her eyes lingered on the ink stains beneath her glove, 2 tones of green. One steady, one forced. 2 writers sharing the same pen. She thanked Mr. Evans and stepped out into the crisp air. Rain clouds hung low, ready to break. Her thoughts gathered like the weather-heavy, forming patterns. The truth was in the handwriting. It changed halfway through. And that change meant someone else had finished the words. Evening light fell low across Ivy Hollow Cottage. The windows glowed faint amber, though the air inside felt cold. Miss Marple stood in the doorway, hat in hand. The maid, Elsie, had agreed to meet her after supper quietly, without the constable knowing. Elsie sat by the hearth, twisting her apron. She looked pale, restless. The kettle hissed softly on the stove behind her. Outside, the wind moved through the ivy, scraping against the glass. "I didn't tell them everything," Elsie said at last. Her voice trembled. "They'd only have said I imagined it." Miss Marple nodded gently. "Sometimes imagination remembers what fear forgets." Elsie swallowed hard. "The night before she died, someone came. I saw him through the window. Mr. Victor Blythe, her nephew." She looked down at her hands. They were arguing. Not loud, but angry. I could hear some of it through the open gate. "What did you hear, child?" "He said she'd ruined everything. Said there'd be no money left now that she'd written to someone in London, confessing." Elsie's eyes darted toward the window again. "She told him to leave. He didn't go right away. But when I looked again, the light in her study had gone out." Miss Marple listened in silence, eyes fixed on the reflection of the fire. After a pause, she asked softly, "And after that?" Elsie's fingers tightened around her apron. "I came early next morning. The door was open, the kettle still warm, and she was gone." She hesitated, then whispered, "He came again that morning, Mr. Victor. Said he was there to collect some papers for the solicitor. But he looked frightened, ma'am. Said he couldn't find the pen. Kept asking where she kept it." Miss Marple turned her head slightly. "The pen?" "Yes, the fountain pen she always used. Green ink one. He said it was important." Elsie's eyes flicked toward the writing desk as she spoke. It was a small movement. Nervous, unmeant. But Miss Marple caught it. The desk sat in the corner of the room, neat as before. Lamp trimmed, blotter clean, papers stacked. But the space beneath it looked oddly shadowed. Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. "May I?" Elsie nodded, unsure. She bent down slowly, gloved hand brushing the floorboards. Dust, paper scrap, a broken pencil, and then her fingers touched metal, thin, cold, and curved. She drew it out carefully. The fountain pen. Green-stained, cracked along the barrel, nib bent. The same one from the first day. But now it was here, hidden under the desk. Miss Marple turned it in the lamplight. The ink shimmered faintly darker than before, almost black. Elsie gasped softly. Marple looked up, her voice quiet as breath. "Because beneath that desk," she said, "lay the missing fountain pen." Rain pressed gently against the windows of Bantry House. A thin mist rolled over the lawn, muting every colour into grey. Inspector Slack sat opposite Miss Marple at the breakfast table, his tone brisk, his patience shorter than usual. "Suicide," he said firmly. "Plain as daylight. The nephew may have upset her, but the guilt was hers. She wrote her letters, saw no way out, and ended it." Miss Marple stirred her tea once. "No cup beside her," she said softly. Slack shrugged. "River water. She drowned." Marple's voice was calm. "Without mud on her shoes?" He frowned. "Perhaps the current washed it off." "Perhaps," she said, her eyes distant. She didn't argue. She never needed to. When he left, she rose slowly and walked to the mantel, where the cracked fountain pen rested in a small glass tray. She had taken it from the cottage the night before evidence, though no one had asked her to. The barrel still gleamed faintly. A sliver of green ink clung to the nib. From her bag she drew a thin knife, the kind used for letter seals. She pried the pen open carefully, twisting the cap until it gave with a quiet pop. A faint scent escaped, not the clean tang of ink, but something sweet and heavy. Familiar. She dipped a pin into the reservoir, touched it to a scrap of paper. The stain spread quickly, green first, then grey. Within seconds the paper curled, edges burning from the chemical bite. Marple's expression didn't change. She knew that smell. Laudanum. She folded the paper neatly and dropped it into the fire. The flame hissed once, then stilled. Poison disguised as ink. Neat. Quiet. Elegant. She sat back down, fingers folded in her lap. Dorothea Blythe hadn't poured herself a fatal dose. She had written it. Each stroke of her pen had delivered a trace of poison to her skin. Each night, a little more, until her pulse slowed, her breath failed, and her heart finally gave way. Someone had placed the poison there. Someone who knew her habits, who knew she'd write until the last hour. The murderer hadn't forced her hand. They'd handed her the means to end her own life. Outside, the rain thickened. The sound filled the room, slow and steady. Miss Marple stared at the small glass tray where the pen had rested. It was beautiful, expensive, and deliberate. Not the kind of tool bought by chance. She looked toward the door where Inspector Slack had gone. Suicide, he'd said. But Miss Marple whispered to the empty room, her voice barely louder than the rain. Who hands a woman poison to sign her own death? Morning broke with pale light over the village. The rain had eased, but everything still smelled of wet earth and smoke. Miss Marple sat quietly in her parlour, knitting untouched on her lap. A sharp knock came at the door. It was Inspector Slack. Face drawn, collar damp, voice clipped. Another one, Miss Marple. The nephew. Found dead this morning. She rose slowly. Victor Blythe? He nodded. In his lodgings above the butcher's shop. Same doctor called. Same verdict so far, heart failure. They walked together through the narrow lanes toward the square. A small crowd had gathered outside the doorway, whispering. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tea and coal dust. Victor lay slumped in an armchair, head turned slightly toward the window. A teacup rested on the table beside him. The rim shimmered faintly green. Slack crossed his arms. Poison, perhaps? Though if it is, we'll prove it soon enough. Miss Marple moved closer. Her eyes swept over the small details others ignored. The spoon lay on the saucer, spotless. No crumbs, no sugar grains. The cup half full, but cold. She leaned forward. Her gloved finger traced the edge of the cup. A faint ring of color. Green. Slack stood behind her, impatient. He must have drunk the same poison, driven by guilt. Marple's tone was calm. He didn't drink tea. Slack turned. What's that? She looked up. Victor Blythe. Always coffee. I remember at the inquest he complained the tea was too weak for his taste. Slack frowned. Then someone poured it for him. Someone who knew his aunt's habits. Marple added softly. She lifted the cup slightly, examining the liquid in the light. The surface shimmered with a dull sheen, not from cream, not from sugar. Something heavier. She set it down gently. There was no sign of struggle. No broken glass. Just quiet death. Again. 2 in 1 week. The same village. The same color. Slack rubbed the back of his neck. 2 deaths. Same poison, maybe. I'll have the lab confirm it. Marple folded her hands. Do that, Inspector, but be careful how you phrase your question. Sometimes, poison hides not in the drink, but in the hand that serves it. He gave her a puzzled look. She smiled faintly. Her mind was already elsewhere. Back to the night Dorothea died, to the visitor with the smooth voice and the missing ink bottle. She looked again at the cup, at the soft green mark along its rim. The pattern of death was repeating. But patterns didn't repeat themselves. They were drawn. Her voice dropped to a whisper, almost to herself. Someone served the wrong cup, she said. On purpose. The afternoon was dull and grey, the kind of light that made every shadow linger. Miss Marple sat by the window with her teacup cooling beside her when the carriage stopped outside Bantry House. A man stepped out, brushing raindrops from his hat, neat, thin, and formal. A solicitor's walk precise, measured, never hurried. Miss Marple? He asked politely as he was shown in. Mr. James Thornton from Bell and Howe, London. I handle the late Mrs. Blythe's estate. She gestured for him to sit. His briefcase clicked open, and a neat stack of papers emerged, tied with red string. The will was executed 3 weeks before her death. He began, unfolding the first page. Mrs. Dorothea Blythe bequeathed her assets to 2 parties. Half to her nephew, Mr. Victor Blythe, deceased. As of yesterday, I understand. Miss Marple nodded quietly. And the other half? Mr. Thornton hesitated, tapping the page. To one, Mrs. Eliza Marrow. Residence unspecified. No relations recorded. He frowned slightly. Curious, really. No address. No signature acknowledgement either. I checked the parish records. No such name listed anywhere in Hampshire. Lady Bantry, who had joined them at the table, leaned forward. Could it have been a friend from abroad? Someone she met after her husband died? Thornton shrugged. Possible. But there's no passport, no correspondence, no trace at all. Miss Marple reached for the document gently. The ink was Dorothea's firm, deliberate strokes in green. But the signature beside Eliza Marrow's name was darker. Different hand, different pressure. Still green, but deeper, thicker. She must have trusted someone very much, Marple murmured. Or been forced to. Thornton looked puzzled. Forgive me. She smiled faintly. Nothing of importance. Please continue. He cleared his throat. There's also mention of an overseas account. Paris branch Willington Trust, the same name that appeared on those unposted letters, I believe. Her eyes sharpened slightly, though her voice remained mild. Yes, I believe so. Thornton packed his case again. In any event, the will can't be settled until Mrs. Marrow is identified. Should you hear of such a person, please inform me at once. He rose, bowed, and left with the same quiet precision with which he'd arrived. The clock struck 4. Rain brushed against the glass. Lady Bantry sighed. Jane. I've never heard that name before. Who could she be? Miss Marple didn't answer at first. She turned the will toward the window light, letting the ink catch the last glint of day. The darker lines gleamed, faintly pressed harder than Dorothea's. Written by someone accustomed to signing more than one name. No woman called Eliza Marrow ever lived in St. Mary Mead, she said at last. Lady Bantry frowned. Then why would Dorothea invent her? Marple's gaze drifted toward the photo on her desk, the one marked R.H. Paris. She didn't invent her, she whispered. There was an alias once used. In Paris. The study was quieter than before. Even the clock in the hall seemed to tick slower. Miss Marple moved carefully, every step soft against the wooden floor. She had been there many times now, each visit revealing one secret more. Today she focused on the bottom drawer. It stuck slightly when she tried to pull it. Old wood, swollen with damp. She tugged again, and it came loose with a low creak. Inside, nothing at first glance. Just a few sheets of paper and the faint scent of lavender. But the drawer lining caught her attention. The paper underlay was newer than the rest. Too smooth, too clean. She pressed her thumb against the corner. It shifted. Not much, but enough. With the edge of her knitting needle, she lifted it carefully. Beneath the lining, a small black notebook lay flat, bound with thin ribbon. She exhaled softly. Hidden things were rarely innocent. The cover was worn, edges soft from use. Inside, neat lines of numbers filled each page. Bank withdrawals, dates, amounts, some marked with initials VB, RH, and once simply EM. The handwriting was tight, deliberate. She read on. The entries became irregular toward the end. Names replaced by single letters. Code, perhaps. Or fear disguised as order. She turned to the final page. The writing there looked rushed. The ink pressed hard. The words read, "If he comes for it again, I'll end it my way." She paused, ran her finger gently along the edge of the line. The green ink had dried unevenly, darker in some strokes, almost brown at the tips, too thick for Dorothea's usual hand. Her script had always been smooth, even graceful. This was not. She lifted the page closer to the window light. The difference was clear: the angle of the letters, the shorter tails, the heavier loops. 2 hands had touched this book. One hiding, one warning. She set the notebook down slowly, her mind arranging the facts in order. Dorothea had known someone was coming. She had prepared, but not well enough. Someone had found the notebook before her death. Someone had read, written, and then returned it. Lady Bantry's voice echoed in her head from days before. Too convenient, Jane, both of them dying the same way. Miss Marple closed the notebook, replaced the lining, and pushed the drawer shut. Her reflection in the glass looked faint and pale, but her eyes were sharp. Secrets were never buried long in St. Mary Mead, not when written in ink, and certainly not when shared between the dead. She took one last look at the desk before leaving, whispering to herself. The warning was real enough, but it wasn't her handwriting. Night returned to St. Mary Mead like a held breath. No moon, only the faint glimmer of mist over the hedgerows. Ivy Hollow Cottage stood empty now, or so everyone believed. Miss Marple stood inside, lamp unlit, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She had arranged everything with quiet precision. On the writing table lay a folded letter. Fresh paper, green ink. A simple note in careful imitation of Dorothea's hand. The remaining money is safe, hidden as before. If I must speak, I will speak tomorrow. She placed the envelope beneath the blotter, where the candlelight would catch just enough of it. Then she sat in the corner chair, behind the half-drawn curtain. The lamp on the desk was turned low, a soft pool of gold in the dark room. Outside, the night held its silence too well. Even the wind seemed to wait. She heard the church clock strike 10, then 11. Stillness stretched until it began to hum in her ears. And then a faint scrape. The garden gate. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, breath shallow. Footsteps, soft, measured. The latch lifted without hesitation, no fumbling, no fear. Whoever came had been there before. The figure entered, moving straight toward the desk. Tall, coat long enough to brush the floor. Hat low. He didn't pause, didn't glance around. He went to the writing table as if it were his own. The light caught his profile for just a moment. Sharp jaw, pale skin, the calm certainty of a man who believed he was alone. Not Victor, not a villager. Someone older, refined, controlled. He opened the blotter, found the letter, and smiled a slow, quiet smile. Miss Marple could see his gloved hand tremble slightly as he unfolded the page. He read it once, twice, then tucked it into his coat pocket. From the same pocket he drew a small vial glass catching the light. He reached for the ink bottle. She waited until he began to pour, his hand steady over the paper. Then she struck the lamp higher. The sudden glow filled the room. He froze. Their eyes met. "Mr. Hale," she said softly. Her voice was steady, almost kind. "I had wondered when you'd come." He straightened slowly, lips tightening, the vial still in his hand. "You shouldn't be here, madam." "Oh, but I should," she replied. "Someone had to see how you managed it, how you turned ink into murder." He said nothing, only lowered the vial back into his pocket with mechanical grace. For a moment, neither moved. The rain began again outside, tapping softly on the window panes. Then he turned toward the door, but Miss Marple's voice stopped him. "Leaving so soon? You haven't even asked where the money is." He hesitated, the faintest smile returning to his lips. "You bluff well, madam," he murmured. Her answer was barely above a whisper. "It wasn't the nephew," she said. "It was the visitor from Paris." Morning. Light broke pale over Bantry House. The mist had lifted, leaving the lawns glistening like glass. Inspector Slack stood by the window, arms folded, his expression tight. Across from him sat Mr. Richard Hale, polished as ever, though his confidence had thinned overnight. Miss Marple sat between them, quiet, gloved hands folded neatly on her lap. The kettle hissed in the corner, untouched. The air was heavy with the kind of silence that waits for truth. Slack began first. "Well, Miss Marple, you insisted I come. You said there'd be proof. I hope for your sake there is. Marple nodded once, then looked at Hale. "Mr. Hale has been most helpful," she said gently. He smiled faintly. "If you call an unexpected visit helpful, then I suppose I have been." Her eyes met his. "It depends what one brings with them when they visit. In your case, it was a bottle." Slack frowned. "What bottle?" "The one he poured from last night," she said. "The same vial he used to fill Mrs. Blythe's pen. Laudanum, mixed into her ink, enough to slow her heart with every letter she wrote." Slack's eyebrows shot up. Hale's fingers tightened on his cane. "Absurd," he said evenly. "I came to comfort a grieving widow, not to harm her." Miss Marple's tone didn't change. "You came because she stopped paying you. You'd blackmailed her once, years ago, in Paris. She forged her husband's signature to clear your debt. When he found out, you vanished, and she's been paying you in silence ever since." Slack stepped closer. "Blackmail, then murder." Hale's jaw tightened. "I deny both," Marple continued as though he hadn't spoken. "When Dorothea told you she would confess to the Willington Trust, you acted. You replaced her ink. A simple trick. You knew she'd sit down that night and write her final apology, and the poison would do the rest." She paused, letting the quiet stretch. "Then her nephew found the letters. He saw your name. He tried to use it against you. But blackmailers never share their profits, do they?" Hale said nothing. Only his breath quickened. Slack leaned forward. "You killed him too." Marple's voice softened. "You served him tea. Same cup, same bottle. But you misjudged him. He wasn't afraid of you. He was greedy. And greed never reads the label." The room fell still again. Hale stared at her, eyes dark, jaw trembling. Finally, he exhaled slowly, the fight draining from his face. "You have no proof," he whispered. "Only words." Marple lifted a small glass vial from her bag. Green residue clung to the rim. "I have this," she said simply. "Found where you dropped it last night." Slack reached for his cuffs. Hale closed his eyes. Outside, the wind shifted, scattering the last of the mist. Miss Marple stood, her voice low but certain. "2 deaths," she said. "1 bottle. 1 man too confident." Richard Hale's calm cracked. His shoulders trembled as he stared at the vial on the table. His voice came thin, dry. Yes, I did it." He leaned forward, words spilling like confession in a church. "Dorothea never sent those letters. I intercepted every one. She wanted to tell the Willington Trust about the forged signatures, about the money she took to save me." His hands clenched. "When she refused to pay again, I had to stop her. She said love forgives debt." His voice broke. "I said only death does." Inspector Slack wrote without looking up. Hale's breath came short, ragged. "I poured the laudanum into her ink. I thought it'd be clean. No mess, no scandal." Then silence. He looked down at his palms. Ink stains, dark green, fresh. "And then?" Miss Marple whispered. He looked at the green ink on his own hands. Evening rain brushed softly against the windows of St. Mary Mead. The lamps were low. The kettle hummed, its gentle tune. Miss Marple poured tea with steady hands, steam curling like memory. Lady Bantry sat opposite, eyes tired but kind. "Do you ever rest, Jane?" she asked. Miss Marple smiled faintly, watching the ripples in her cup. "Rest comes when truth does," she said softly. "But truth, my dear, cools slower than tea." Her gaze drifted to the small glass bottle on the shelf, green ink catching the light. "And somewhere," she murmured, "another quiet village waits its turn."